Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of the most timeless Greek myths, Persephone's abduction. Picture yourself walking through a lush, tranquil meadow filled with bright, vibrant flowers, where the air smells sweet, and the sun is gentle on your skin. Everything feels peaceful, serene, like a moment frozen in time. Now imagine this calm scene interrupted by a sudden, unexpected event. Persephone, the beautiful goddess of spring, is about to be taken into the shadows of the underworld. But don't worry, we'll soften this story so you can drift into a peaceful rest, leaving behind the chaos for the calm embrace of ancient mythology. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, while we're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Persephone, also known as Kore, led a peaceful, joyful existence in the world of gods and goddesses. She was the embodiment of spring's beauty, flowers bloomed at her feet, and nature thrived in her presence. She spent her days playing with her companions in the meadows, basking in the gentle light of the earth's endless spring. But little did she know, her life was about to change forever, and not in the way she expected. The tale of her abduction by Hades, the god of the underworld, is as captivating as it is gentle. It's a story of transformation, of coming to terms with what's unexpected, and of the powerful balance between light and dark. While we're not diving into the more intense aspects of this myth, it's important to note that this wasn't just an ordinary day for Persephone. It was a day that marked the beginning of her dual existence, a life split between two worlds, the world of life and light, and the world of death and darkness. And tonight, we'll take this journey softly, allowing you to drift away as Persephone's story unfolds. Before we get into the twists and turns of Persephone's abduction, let's take a moment to appreciate the quiet, peaceful life she once enjoyed. Imagine her surrounded by vibrant fields, bursting with blossoms in every color of the rainbow. Birds sing softly in the trees, and a gentle breeze carries the scent of fresh flowers. Persephone, the goddess of spring, was the radiant life of nature itself. Her very presence brought forth the season of growth, renewal, and beauty. In a world that was constantly shifting between seasons, she was the symbol of light, warmth, and fertility. Persephone's role in the Greek pantheon was one of innocence and youth. She wasn't a ruler of power or wisdom like Athena or Hera. No, Persephone was a maiden, content in her innocence, delighting in the beauty of the world around her. She spent her days with nymphs and flowers, weaving garlands of wildflowers, playing and dancing with her companions. The world at her feet was lush, verdant, and full of life. Every spring, when Persephone walked across the earth, flowers bloomed in her wake, and the land grew green and full. The people of the world rejoiced in the bounty she provided, and her beauty and grace brought peace to all who gazed upon her. Historians still argue about Persephone's role in the grander narrative of the gods. Was she merely a symbol of the seasonal cycle, representing the renewal of life each spring, or did she possess deeper meanings about the feminine, the earth, and the passage of time? Some scholars suggest that Persephone was not just a goddess of spring but also of transformation and growth. Her story, they argue, reflects how growth and change often come with loss and change. Others see her more simply as the goddess of flowers and youthful beauty. Either way, one thing is certain, her life before her abduction was tranquil and full of light, unburdened by the complexities of the divine world and the responsibilities that came with being a goddess. Her days were spent walking through meadows, the earth's beauty providing her with constant inspiration, and her innocent nature stood as a symbol of hope and vitality for all who encountered her. Yet, even in this idyllic existence, fate had other plans. The universe, as we know, is full of balance, and while Persephone brought the light of spring, it was inevitable that she would encounter darkness. Just as the flowers bloom and wither, so too does the cycle of life shift between light and dark. And it was this very shift, this inescapable balance, that would soon pull her away from the peaceful life she knew. For now, though, as you close your eyes, imagine Persephone strolling through the meadows, the soft sun shining down, and the world at peace. Let the tranquility of her life before the change wash over you as you prepare to drift into sleep, where everything remains calm and unhurried, much like her world once was. As the days passed in her peaceful existence, Persephone remained blissfully unaware of the darker forces at work. Meanwhile, deep within the earth, Hades, the god of the underworld, watched from the shadows. Hades, by all accounts, wasn't a god known for frivolous desire. He ruled over the realm of the dead, a place of solemnity and silence, far removed from the warmth and beauty of the earth above. But something stirred within him, something unexpected and powerful, a longing for Persephone. Hades had seen her beauty from afar, but it wasn't just her outward appearance that captivated him, it was her innocence, her youth, and the life she brought to the world. For Hades, whose existence was dark and dreary, Persephone represented all that was bright, vibrant, and full of potential. She was the embodiment of life, the polar opposite of his shadowed domain. And though Hades rarely expressed emotion, there was a quiet, consuming desire within him to have her by his side, to bring her into the world of the dead, to make her his queen. Historians still debate whether Hades' desire for Persephone was driven by love, loneliness, or something deeper, perhaps a need to find balance between his realm and the vibrant world of the living. Some scholars argue that Hades' attraction was merely a natural part of his role as the god of death, that his longing for Persephone was symbolic of death's inevitable pull on life itself. Others see it as a genuine desire for companionship, a loneliness that could only be filled by Persephone's vitality and light. Whatever the true nature of his feelings, what is clear is that Hades was determined to bring Persephone into his dark world, regardless of what the consequences might be. But Hades didn't act on his feelings right away. He watched and waited, patient, knowing that the right moment would come. Unlike the impulsive gods of Mount Olympus, Hades was a god of quiet calculation. When the time came, he would make his move, not in the chaos of battle or grand displays of force, but through a clever, secretive plan that would lead Persephone into his grasp. One day, while Persephone wandered the meadows, plucking flowers and enjoying the warmth of the sun, Hades finally made his move. He opened up the earth beneath her, creating a gaping chasm that would lead directly to his realm in the underworld. In the blink of an eye, Persephone was taken by surprise, and before she could even react, she found herself plummeting into the dark, unknown depths below. The earth swallowed her whole, and as she disappeared from the world of light, the only thing she could hear was the faint, echoing sound of Hades' voice, calm and assured, beckoning her into his domain. She had no choice but to descend into the shadows of the underworld. This moment, though sudden and unexpected, marked the beginning of Persephone's transformation. No longer was she the innocent goddess of spring, carefree and full of life. Now, she was the queen of the underworld, and her fate would be forever entwined with Hades. The moment she was abducted, everything changed, not just for her, but for the very world around her. Historians still argue about how Persephone truly felt about her abduction. Was she completely unwilling, a victim of Hades' desire, or did she, over time, come to accept her role as queen of the underworld? Some believe she was entirely reluctant, forced into a marriage with a god she didn't choose. Others suggest that, in time, she found a kind of power and autonomy in her new role. Perhaps, like all great myths, there is a little bit of both in the truth of Persephone's story, resistance and acceptance, conflict and reconciliation. Whatever the case, Persephone's abduction was a turning point in her life, one that would change her forever. For now, though, as you drift into sleep, let the story of Persephone's abduction fade into the quiet calm of the night. Let the darkness of her journey be softened, like the quiet lapping of water against the shores of the Chinampas. As Persephone moved into the unknown, so too can we move gently into our dreams, where the night holds no fear, only peaceful rest. After Persephone's sudden disappearance, the world she had known was left behind, fading into the distance. And while it might seem like the tale has become dark and overwhelming, let's slow it down a bit. Before Persephone's descent into the underworld, she had been in the midst of something entirely peaceful, gathering flowers. Picture this, Persephone, in a field bathed in sunlight, surrounded by wildflowers. She reaches down to pick a blossom, unaware of what is about to unfold. The very flower she picks sets the stage for everything that happens next. The gentle world she knew was about to change forever, but it happened in the most unexpected of ways. It all began with a simple, serene moment. Persephone, carefree and surrounded by the natural beauty of spring, bent to gather flowers, perhaps lilies or poppies, nature's colors filling the air. But what she didn't know was that this very moment would trap her in a way that no other could. The flowers she so loved were in full bloom because of her presence, a goddess of spring, but it was this same world of beauty that would be her undoing. As she bent to pick a particular flower, a flower that would remain unnamed in the myth, the ground beneath her suddenly split wide open. Historians still debate whether the flower was the bait or whether Persephone was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Was the flower chosen by Hades to lure her in, or did Persephone simply fall into his trap by chance, naively wandering too far from her usual realm of safe meadows? Some argue that the flower was a literal bait, a symbol of how beauty can mask danger. Others suggest that Persephone's destiny was already sealed, the gods had conspired, and this flower was simply the trigger. Either way, what matters is that this quiet, unassuming moment in a field of flowers became the turning point of Persephone's life. Hades, hidden deep beneath the earth, had been waiting for this moment. The goddess of spring was everything he longed for: beauty, youth, life. In his realm, there was nothing but silence and shadows, and the thought of filling that void with Persephone's radiant energy was irresistible. As she reached for the flower, the earth itself opened, and Hades rose up, swift and powerful, from the depths of his dark kingdom. With little time for hesitation, he swept Persephone into his chariot and took her away, deeper into the underworld, while the flowers of the field seemed to tremble in her absence. As the earth closed behind them, Persephone's world shifted from light to dark. The flowers that had been her world, the soft petals she had lovingly touched, became a distant memory, buried beneath layers of soil and shadow. In this moment, Persephone was no longer the goddess of spring, freely roaming through meadows. She was now the queen of the underworld, a place where sunlight couldn't reach, where the warmth of life was replaced with the chill of death. Yet, despite the severity of this transition, there's an odd sense of peace to it. The transformation, though sudden and forceful, will eventually lead to a reconciliation of opposites, the balance of light and dark, life and death, growth and stillness. Historians still argue about the meaning behind Persephone's abduction. Was it a forced captivity, or did Persephone, in her divine nature, embrace her dual existence? Some suggest that the tale symbolizes the natural cycle of life, how we must leave one world behind to enter another, to be reborn in different ways. Others argue that Persephone's experience represents the loss of innocence and the transition from youth into maturity, symbolizing the necessary journey every individual must take to come into their own power. Either way, the flower, which seemed so innocent, became the symbol of this transformative moment, ushering Persephone from the world of the living to the underworld's shadowy embrace. As you settle into your own dreams, perhaps this part of Persephone's story can remind you of the stillness that follows a moment of change. Just as she was swept away, we too can drift into rest, with the promise that every shift, no matter how sudden, brings us closer to understanding. And while Persephone's journey into the underworld began in an unexpected way, it was, in its own way, necessary for the balance that she would eventually find between her two realms. Now that Persephone has been taken by Hades, the world she once knew seems distant, far beyond reach. The peaceful fields of flowers and the warmth of her mother Demeter's embrace were left behind in a sudden moment of darkness. But what happened next was not a dramatic cry of defeat. No, instead, Persephone's reaction to her abduction was as complex as it was quiet. Rather than throwing herself into despair immediately, she began to process the change, slowly, perhaps even reluctantly, adjusting to her new reality in the underworld. When Persephone was first taken, she must have been overwhelmed. Imagine, just moments ago, she was in a meadow picking flowers, a moment of serenity. Now, she was in a completely foreign world, surrounded by the coldness and the shadows of the underworld, far from the warmth of the earth and her mother's love. Initially, she probably resisted Hades' control, her heart aching for her old life, for the sunshine and the blossoms that would no longer surround her. But there, in the deepest shadows of the earth, Persephone began to come to terms with her situation. Her world of flowers had vanished, replaced by a dark and silent expanse. But this wasn't simply about being taken away, it was about a profound transformation. Historians still argue whether Persephone ever truly accepted her abduction, or if she remained a captive in her heart. Some believe that Persephone's transition was voluntary, symbolizing the moment when a woman, or anyone, steps into their true power by embracing the shadows of life as well as the light. In this interpretation, Persephone learns to navigate the underworld not as a captive, but as a queen. Others suggest that Persephone was a victim of Hades' desire and had no choice but to accept her fate. Perhaps, in time, she learned to adapt, finding peace in her new role, but her initial experience was one of forced submission. One important aspect of Persephone's reaction to her abduction is how she was neither entirely passive nor entirely rebellious. It's easy to imagine her standing at the threshold of the underworld, confused, angry, and perhaps frightened. But as time passed, she began to adapt. She was no longer the carefree maiden who danced through the meadows, now, she was the queen of a vast, dark realm. As she came to terms with her new role, Persephone found a way to embrace her identity in the underworld. She took on the mantle of queen, a role that required strength and wisdom, qualities that, though forged in darkness, would make her more than a mere captive. And here, in the quiet darkness of the underworld, Persephone learned to navigate her new life, learning the ways of the realm over which she would eventually rule alongside Hades. At first, it was probably an isolating experience, being taken away from everything she had ever known, adjusting to an entirely new existence. But slowly, she began to understand her own power and role in the underworld. As queen, she wasn't a prisoner, she was a ruler in her own right, an equal partner to Hades, the god of death. But no matter how Persephone eventually embraced her role, it is clear that she did not remain unchanged. The Persephone who was taken was not the same Persephone who would eventually return to the world above. Her transformation mirrored the natural cycle of the earth itself, life and death, growth and decay. In this new realm, Persephone was reborn in a way, taking on a new form, one that balanced both the beauty of life and the solemnity of death. Historians still argue about the nature of Persephone's transformation. Was she fully willing to embrace her role as queen of the underworld, or did she come to terms with it because she had no other choice? Some argue that Persephone was a symbol of resilience, someone who could adapt to her circumstances and find power even in the most difficult of situations. Others suggest that her transformation was one of loss, a young woman forced into a role she never asked for. But the fact remains that Persephone did, in time, become a powerful figure in the underworld, one whose story would be told for generations as a symbol of change, balance, and the acceptance of both light and dark. As you relax and drift into sleep, remember that like Persephone, all of us experience moments of forced change and transformation. We may not be abducted to an underworld, but we all face moments when our lives take unexpected turns. And like Persephone, we too can learn to adapt, finding our strength and power even in the face of the unknown. In those moments, we become the queens and kings of our own journeys, embracing both the light and the dark. Now, as Persephone adjusts to her new role in the underworld, we turn to her mother, Demeter, whose grief over her daughter's abduction was overwhelming. Demeter, goddess of the harvest, was the embodiment of fertility, growth, and the life-giving forces of nature. Her bond with Persephone, her only child, was unbreakable. When her daughter was taken by Hades, Demeter's world, along with the world around her, seemed to fall into despair. Demeter's search for Persephone was not just a physical journey, it was a deeply emotional and spiritual quest. She wandered the earth, crying out for her daughter, her grief so immense that it affected the natural world. The earth, which had once been abundant with life and beauty, began to wither and fade. Crops failed, the trees bore no fruit, and the land itself seemed to mourn along with Demeter. It was said that the very earth fell silent in its sorrow, as Demeter's sorrow mirrored the suffering of all living things. Without Persephone's presence, the earth could not thrive. In this period of loss, Demeter's connection to nature deepened. Her anguish was so great that she withdrew from the world of the gods and the celestial realm, retreating to the earth to mourn in solitude. She hid herself away in a temple and refused to let the earth produce any crops. The people of the world, dependent on her to provide the harvest, began to suffer. Without Demeter's blessings, famine spread throughout the land, and the gods began to take notice of the devastation that was unfolding. Historians still debate the symbolism behind Demeter's grief and the subsequent desolation of the earth. Some believe that Demeter's sorrow reflects the cycles of the seasons. When Persephone was absent, winter descended upon the world, and when she returned, spring would bloom again. Others suggest that Demeter's mourning represents the deep maternal bond between mother and child, one so strong that it affects the very forces of nature. Regardless of the specific interpretation, Demeter's sorrow played a crucial role in the myth, highlighting the theme of loss and the eventual restoration of balance. Demeter's grief was not just personal, it was cosmic. The very forces of life and death, of growth and decay, were at odds during her search for Persephone. The earth itself mirrored her sadness, as the crops withered and the trees bore no fruit. This gave rise to one of the most beautiful and powerful ideas in Greek mythology, the cycle of life and death. Demeter's sorrow, though painful, was a necessary part of the natural order. As a mother loses her child to the dark realm of the underworld, so too does the earth lose its fertility in the absence of the goddess of spring. The loss of Persephone, and the accompanying grief of Demeter, created an undeniable rhythm that mirrored the seasons, life, death, and rebirth. The ancient Greeks understood the connection between the land and the divine, and the story of Demeter and Persephone helped explain the cycles of nature, the quiet dormancy of winter followed by the return of spring's vibrant life. Without Demeter's grief, the world would not experience the renewal that came with Persephone's return. Now, as Demeter roams the earth in search of her daughter, imagine the weight of her sadness. The earth seems to respond to her grief, as the once green fields and forests become barren. Even the sun grows dim, as if the heavens themselves are mourning the loss of Persephone. The natural world is no longer vibrant with life, it's quiet and still, mirroring Demeter's sorrow. Yet, in the stillness, there is a subtle promise. As deep as the grief runs, so too does the hope for renewal. Persephone's eventual return is promised through the sorrow of her mother, marking the cyclical nature of life that exists between both the human heart and the world itself. As you settle into rest, let Demeter's story remind you of the cycles that govern nature, and life itself. Even in moments of grief, there is always the potential for renewal, for spring after winter. Just as Persephone's return to her mother signals the return of growth, so too can we find peace in the cycles of our own lives, knowing that moments of stillness will always give way to new beginnings. As Demeter's grief deepened, the world around her seemed to mirror her sorrow. The once thriving landscapes of the earth began to fade, and the vibrant beauty of spring withered away into the cold grip of winter. The skies darkened, crops withered, and the fields that had once been full of life and color fell into a solemn silence. This wasn't just a reflection of Demeter's mourning, it was a cosmic shift that affected the entire world. The earth itself seemed to mourn Persephone's absence, and the world fell into a period of stillness and loss. Imagine this. The warm, golden hues of spring were replaced by the pale grays of winter, and the air that once carried the sweet scent of flowers was now cold and still. The seasons, once full of life, had become a reflection of sorrow, a sorrow that came from the very heart of Demeter. The fields were barren, the trees bore no fruit, and the flowers that once blossomed in the sun's warmth now lay dormant beneath the earth. The world seemed to pause, holding its breath, waiting for Persephone's return. Historians still debate the symbolism of this natural decline. Some see it as a metaphor for the life cycle, the inevitable descent into death that precedes the rebirth of spring. Others suggest that Demeter's sorrow reflects the human experience of loss and mourning, the way grief can leave the world feeling dull and devoid of color. In either interpretation, the myth underscores the idea that life and death, growth and decay, are intricately connected. One cannot exist without the other, and the pain of loss is always followed by the potential for renewal. In the Greek myth, the earth's fading beauty during Demeter's grief is a reflection of the larger theme of change. Nature is never static, it is constantly shifting, cycling between periods of growth and dormancy. Just as we experience moments of joy and sorrow in our own lives, the earth experiences its own cycles of life and death. The withering of the fields during Demeter's sorrow is not a punishment, it is a natural response to her grief, a reminder that everything in life is connected. This seasonal transformation, marked by the absence of Persephone, is symbolic of the natural rhythms of the world. The fall of leaves in autumn, the retreat of life during winter, and the return of growth in the spring all echo the cycles of grief, renewal, and hope. Demeter's sorrow wasn't just personal, it was a universal experience, mirrored in the earth's own seasonal changes. The earth, in its deep connection with the goddess, experienced a reflection of Demeter's heartache, showing how deeply intertwined the divine and natural worlds were for the Greeks. As you listen to this, let the imagery of the fading earth fill your thoughts, the bare branches of trees, the frost-covered ground, the quiet, muted beauty of winter. It may seem somber at first, but there is peace in the stillness. The promise of renewal is inherent in the quiet dormancy. Just as winter gives way to spring, sorrow gives way to joy. And as you settle into your own rest tonight, let the cycle of life and death, of growth and stillness, remind you of the constant flow of life. Like the earth, we too must rest before we rise again, and in that rest, we find the peace we need to heal. Now that Persephone has been taken to the underworld, let's focus on how she began to adapt to her new life. After the shock and confusion of her sudden abduction, Persephone found herself in a place completely different from the warm, light-filled world she knew. The underworld, ruled by Hades, was dark and cold, a realm where nothing grew and nothing flourished. It was a place of quiet stillness, where shadows loomed and the sun's warmth never reached. But even in this dark place, Persephone was not entirely alone. Hades, the god of the underworld, took her to his palace and, though his intentions were to make her his queen, he did so with a gentleness that contrasted with the darkness of the realm he ruled. He didn't force her to be his, but rather offered her a choice. As the days passed, Persephone found herself gradually adjusting to the underworld. Though it was not her home, and despite the initial pain and disorientation, she began to understand her new role as the queen of the underworld. She learned how to rule beside Hades, and in time, she grew into her position as an equal partner in the realm of death. The process of adapting to the underworld was not one of immediate acceptance. It wasn't an easy transition. Imagine being taken from the sunlit world you knew and waking up in a cold, silent realm, far away from everything that was familiar. For Persephone, this new life was a challenge. But as she settled into the underworld, she realized that she had the power to shape it in her own way. Hades treated her with respect, and they began to rule together, bringing balance to the realm of the dead. Historians still debate the nature of Persephone's relationship with Hades during her time in the underworld. Was she truly a reluctant captive, as the myth suggests? Or did she, over time, find a sense of power and purpose in her new role? Some argue that Persephone's time in the underworld represents the idea of forced transition, how we are often pulled from our comfort zones, sometimes unwillingly, but ultimately emerge stronger and more complete. Others suggest that Persephone's transformation was more about embracing her duality, her ability to be both a goddess of life and a queen of death, to embody both spring and winter. For now, let's focus on the peace Persephone eventually found in the underworld. The palace of Hades, though dark and foreboding, became her domain. It was a place where she could rule, where she could contribute to the balance between life and death. While the earth above withered in her absence, Persephone began to find her own form of peace beneath the earth. The underworld, once a realm of sorrow and despair, gradually became a place of quiet order, where souls could rest and where Persephone's presence brought a sense of dignity to the dead. As we ease into sleep tonight, consider the transformation Persephone underwent in the underworld. She was taken from the light and thrust into darkness, yet she didn't remain a helpless captive. Instead, she learned to adapt, to grow into her new role as queen of the underworld. It was in this shadowy place that she found a new strength, a quiet strength that allowed her to find peace, even in the darkest of realms. Just as Persephone adapted to her circumstances, we too can find our peace in times of change, and find the strength to navigate the unknown with grace. As Persephone settles into her new life in the underworld, an event occurs that will forever change her connection to both worlds. While the realm of darkness slowly becomes more familiar, there's a subtle but pivotal moment that seals her fate, and it all begins with a simple yet symbolic act: eating the pomegranate seeds. This small, seemingly innocent action would tie her to the underworld, and in turn, to Hades, forever. The pomegranate, a fruit often associated with fertility, rebirth, and the passage between life and death, plays a critical role in Persephone's transformation. As the story goes, Persephone, while in the underworld, sat down with Hades and, whether out of curiosity or perhaps a quiet acceptance of her fate, ate 6 seeds of a pomegranate. Little did she know, these seeds would not only bind her to the underworld, but also to Hades, her husband, in a symbolic and literal way. Eating the pomegranate was more than just a matter of hunger or indulgence. The act of consuming the fruit was a ritualistic act of integration into the realm of death. By eating those seeds, Persephone accepted her place in the underworld, acknowledging that her life would now be divided between 2 realms, the light of spring and the shadow of death. It was a powerful act of acceptance, though not without consequence. From that moment on, Persephone would spend part of the year in the underworld, a queen in the domain of the dead, and part of the year above, where she could once again return to her role as goddess of spring and rebirth. Historians still argue over the significance of the pomegranate seeds. Some view it as a symbol of the cyclical nature of life and death, the continuous cycle of growth, decay, and renewal. Others suggest that Persephone's act of eating the seeds was a reflection of her growing acceptance of her dual role, how she became both the goddess of life and death, a symbol of the balance between light and dark. It's clear that the pomegranate seeds represent a key moment in her journey, a moment that, in the grand scheme of the myth, demonstrates how transformation often comes with both sacrifice and power. For Persephone, this moment marked the shift from innocence to experience. By eating the pomegranate, she not only became tied to the underworld, but she also gained a greater understanding of the balance between life and death. The seeds were a symbol of her new role as a queen of death, but they also linked her to the springtime, the realm of life. The myth suggests that her time in the underworld would be marked by both sorrow and responsibility, while her time above would bring renewal and hope to the earth. In many ways, the pomegranate seeds represent a turning point not only for Persephone but for the very rhythm of the seasons. As she spends part of the year in the underworld and part in the land of the living, the earth itself changes. Her descent into the underworld marks the arrival of winter, while her return to the surface brings spring's vibrant life. The act of eating the pomegranate reflects the delicate balance of life and death, as one cannot exist without the other. As you drift into sleep, think of Persephone sitting in the quiet underworld, her fingers gently picking the seeds from the pomegranate. With each bite, she's slowly embracing both the light and the dark, the life she left behind and the one she now inhabits. Just as we sometimes find ourselves caught between 2 worlds, awake and asleep, day and night, Persephone's story reminds us that both darkness and light are necessary for growth and balance. In her acceptance, she found not just her power, but the cycle of life itself. Now that Persephone has been bound to the underworld by her consumption of the pomegranate seeds, let's explore the more subtle and quiet aspect of her journey, Hades' gentle courtship of Persephone. In the shadows of the underworld, Persephone begins to adjust to her new role, but Hades, while the ruler of the realm, is not the typical dark and terrifying figure one might expect. In fact, Hades' approach to Persephone is far from aggressive, it's measured, calm, and respectful. His courtship of Persephone was not one of force, but of patience and quiet understanding. Unlike the fiery gods of Olympus who often pursued their loves with overwhelming force, Hades' nature was different. He ruled the underworld, a dark and silent realm, and he had no need for brash displays of power. His love for Persephone was neither impulsive nor rash. He was patient, understanding, and in a way, just as much a prisoner of his own solitude as Persephone was in her new environment. Historians often describe Hades' courtship as one of quiet respect. There were no grand gestures or loud declarations of love. Instead, Hades offered Persephone a seat by his side, an equal partner in the underworld. His quiet, consistent presence slowly allowed Persephone to see that the underworld, though dark and cold, could also offer her power and autonomy. Perhaps it was in the isolation of the underworld that Persephone began to understand her dual nature, how she could be both a goddess of spring and a queen of death. The courtship of Persephone in the underworld, unlike many other myths where love is often pursued with force or violence, is portrayed as gentle. It's clear that Hades didn't simply take Persephone out of desire or selfishness. His love was more about partnership, mutual respect, and understanding. While many interpretations of Hades focus on him as a grim and intimidating figure, this version of him emphasizes his solitude and his need for companionship. In this way, he is depicted not as a kidnapper, but as a god who had been isolated in his realm for eternity, now finding a soul to share it with. Hades also gave Persephone the power to rule alongside him. She wasn't just a passive figure, imprisoned in the underworld. In the absence of sunlight and life, Persephone took on a new strength, and together with Hades, they brought order to the souls in the underworld. Hades didn't force her to love him, instead, he allowed her to take her time, to settle into her new role, and to find her own space in the world of shadows. This respect and space for Persephone's autonomy might be one of the reasons their relationship is depicted as one of mutual respect, rather than one of coercion. Historians still debate whether Hades' courtship of Persephone was as gentle as the myth suggests. Some view his quiet, respectful nature as symbolic of a deeper spiritual truth, that love, true love, is a balance between light and dark, between freedom and acceptance. Others argue that Persephone's eventual return to the surface reflects that she wasn't entirely content in the underworld, suggesting that Hades' love, while gentle, wasn't enough to make her forget the world above. Either way, what's clear is that Hades' role in Persephone's life was one of patience, and this patience played a key part in her gradual acceptance of her role as the queen of the underworld. As you ease into sleep tonight, consider the subtlety of Hades' courtship. It wasn't about grand gestures or overwhelming declarations, it was about respect, understanding, and quiet companionship. Just like Persephone, sometimes we don't need overwhelming actions to feel safe, loved, and at peace. Sometimes, it's the quiet, gentle presence of those around us that helps us find peace, even in the most unexpected of places. As Persephone becomes more accustomed to her life in the underworld, far from the world above, the grief of Demeter grows ever deeper. Her search for her daughter continues, and the suffering of the earth mirrors her sorrow. With the crops failing and the earth barren, it becomes clear that Demeter's grief isn't just personal, it has cosmic consequences. The very balance of the world is disrupted by the loss of Persephone, and the gods on Mount Olympus can no longer ignore the devastation caused by her absence. The time has come for Demeter and Zeus to meet and seek a resolution, but their negotiations are far from simple. Zeus, the king of the gods, was well aware of Demeter's grief and the damage it was causing to the earth. The people of the world were suffering from famine, and even the gods could no longer overlook the consequences of Demeter's sorrow. He knew he had to act, but he was also aware of the delicate balance between the realms of life and death. Persephone's abduction wasn't just a matter of family strife, it was a matter of cosmic order, of the cycles of life and death that were central to the world. The earth needed both Demeter's grief and Persephone's presence to thrive, and the resolution of this conflict was no easy task. Zeus's role in this negotiation is fascinating. He's caught between two powerful forces, Demeter, his sister, who demands the return of her daughter, and Hades, his brother, who now holds Persephone as his queen. Zeus, as the ruler of the gods, has the authority to intervene, but he also understands the importance of maintaining the natural balance between life and death. The gods of the underworld had their own realm to rule, and their power couldn't simply be undermined without consequence. So, Zeus approaches the matter with caution, seeking a resolution that would satisfy both Demeter's grief and Hades' claim over Persephone. Historians still argue about the nature of Zeus's intervention in this myth. Some view him as a figure of authority, stepping in to restore order to the world, while others suggest that Zeus's role in the negotiation was more about balancing competing desires, keeping both Demeter and Hades content without upsetting the natural order of the cosmos. In either case, the negotiations between Demeter and Zeus were a key moment in the myth. This wasn't simply a matter of motherly love, it was about the balance of life, death, and the eternal cycles that governed the world. The negotiations culminate in a decision that will affect the fate of Persephone, and the earth itself. Zeus decrees that Persephone will spend part of the year with Demeter, in the world above, and part of the year with Hades, in the underworld. This arrangement ensures that both the forces of life and death are honored, and that the world will continue to experience both the cycles of growth and decay. Persephone's dual role, split between the realms of light and darkness, is a reflection of the natural rhythms of the earth itself. Just as the seasons shift between warmth and cold, growth and dormancy, Persephone's time above and below ground represents the delicate balance between life and death. As Persephone is returned to her mother, the earth comes back to life. Flowers bloom once again, crops grow, and the earth is once more filled with vitality. But when Persephone descends back into the underworld, winter returns, and the earth rests in stillness. This arrangement, while born from grief and negotiation, becomes a fundamental aspect of the natural world. Persephone's journey, though tragic at first, ultimately brings about a cyclical harmony, ensuring that the earth will always experience both death and rebirth. Zeus's role in this negotiation shows the complex nature of his authority. He is not simply a figure of power, making unilateral decisions. Instead, his actions reflect a deep understanding of the interconnectedness of all things, the gods, nature, and humanity. By negotiating a solution that honors both Demeter's pain and Hades' rights, Zeus helps restore balance to the world. In the end, his role in the myth is as much about preserving cosmic order as it is about resolving the emotional conflict between the gods. As you settle into your own rest tonight, think about the negotiations that take place in our own lives. Often, balance is not achieved through force but through careful consideration, compromise, and understanding. Just as Zeus helped find a resolution that allowed for both life and death to coexist, so too can we find peace by balancing the different forces in our lives. As we continue this myth, we come to the moment of resolution. After the long and emotional negotiations between Demeter and Zeus, a compromise is reached and Persephone's fate is sealed. Persephone will spend part of the year in the underworld with Hades, and part of the year above ground with her mother Demeter. This agreement, though born out of necessity, symbolizes the delicate balance between two worlds, life and death, light and darkness, and ensures that both realms will continue to function in harmony. The decision wasn't an easy one for any of the gods involved. Demeter, of course, was overjoyed to have her daughter return to her, but the deal meant that Persephone would have to leave her for a portion of the year. The earth's fertility and vitality would again be at the mercy of her absence. For Hades, though, the compromise meant that he couldn't keep Persephone in the underworld all the time. Yet, even in this limited arrangement, he had gained a queen for his dark realm, and the promise of Persephone's return was a gentle acceptance of his love. The mythology of Persephone's return is symbolic of the changing of the seasons. In the time when Persephone is with Demeter, the earth flourishes, crops grow, and spring and summer arrive, bringing life to the world. But when Persephone returns to the underworld, autumn and winter descend, and the earth falls into a period of rest. This cycle of life and death, growth and dormancy, mirrors the cycles that we experience in our own lives. Just as the earth rests and renews itself in Persephone's absence, so too do we experience times of quiet reflection and renewal in our own lives. Historians still debate whether the division of Persephone's time between the worlds was a symbol of balance or a forced compromise. Some view this arrangement as a reflection of the human experience of duality, how we are often pulled between two opposing forces, both in the world and within ourselves. Others suggest that Persephone's time in the underworld was meant to represent the necessary acceptance of death, while her time above ground symbolizes life and renewal. Either way, the compromise between the gods has lasting significance, not just in Greek mythology, but in our understanding of the natural world and the cycles that govern our lives. The agreement also represents Persephone's transformation. No longer is she the innocent maiden who roamed the meadows, untouched by the complexities of life. She is now the queen of the underworld, a goddess who understands both the beauty of life and the necessity of death. This duality makes Persephone a powerful figure in Greek mythology, embodying the balance between creation and destruction, light and darkness, life and death. Her transformation is a powerful reminder that change is often necessary for growth, and that even in moments of loss, there is the potential for rebirth. As Persephone returns to her mother's side, the world above rejoices. Flowers bloom, crops grow, and life returns to the earth. The arrival of spring and the warmth of summer are symbolic of Persephone's return, a reminder that with every cycle of death comes the promise of renewal. And when she descends back into the underworld, the cycle begins again, bringing with it the quiet beauty of autumn and the stillness of winter. For now, as you lie down to sleep, think of Persephone's journey, not just as a story of loss, but one of transformation. Her return to the surface of the earth, followed by her descent back into the underworld, reflects the natural rhythms of our own lives, where periods of growth and rest follow one another, constantly renewing us. Just as Persephone embraces both her roles with grace, so can we find peace in the balance between light and dark, life and rest. Now that we've reached the conclusion of Persephone's journey, it's time to reflect on the lasting implications of her transformation, and how scholars still debate her role in this myth. Did Persephone's experience in the underworld represent a forced captivity, or was it a voluntary transformation, a maturation process that made her into the queen she was destined to be? Some historians argue that Persephone's time in the underworld was purely symbolic of a necessary shift in her life, a coming-of-age story that mirrors the eternal cycles of nature. Others suggest that her time in the underworld was less about growth and more about survival, an experience she had to adapt to, rather than embrace. The transformation of Persephone is multifaceted. On one hand, she is the joyful goddess of spring, an innocent maiden whose presence brings life to the earth. On the other, she is the queen of the underworld, a ruler who navigates the realm of the dead with grace and strength. But how much of this transformation was her own choice? Did Persephone, over time, accept her new role, or was she simply swept into it by the power of the gods around her? Historians still argue about whether Persephone was a victim of circumstance, swept away by Hades' desire and then forced into her role as queen of the underworld, or whether she grew into this role willingly. Some believe that Persephone's time in the underworld was her opportunity to learn the value of balance, how life and death are eternally intertwined. Her descent into the underworld might have symbolized the necessity of confronting both the beauty and the darkness of existence. This idea would align with the cycles of the seasons, where death and decay always give way to life and rebirth. Others argue that Persephone's transformation was less about choice and more about fate. She was taken unwillingly, and it was only after some time that she adapted to her new life. In this interpretation, Persephone's journey to the underworld was one of loss, a forced separation from the world of light and life that she had always known. Her eventual return, then, symbolizes the resilience of the human, or divine, spirit in the face of hardship. Persephone's transformation was not something she chose, but rather something that fate imposed upon her. However, no matter the interpretation, Persephone's transformation is undeniably profound. Her ability to balance the roles of both goddess of spring and queen of the underworld makes her a unique figure in Greek mythology. She is neither entirely a victim nor completely a heroine, she is a complex character who navigates the space between these two extremes. Her duality makes her an enduring symbol of the balance between life and death, growth and decay. As we drift into sleep, consider Persephone's transformation. Life is full of changes, some of which are within our control and others that come upon us unexpectedly. Just as Persephone adapted to her new role, we too can learn to navigate the shifts and changes in our lives. We all experience periods of growth, loss, and eventual renewal, just as Persephone does, balancing her two worlds. Let her journey remind us that even in the darkest times, there is always the potential for growth and rebirth. Persephone's journey from innocent maiden to queen of the underworld is perhaps one of the most iconic transformations in Greek mythology. But the beauty of her story lies in the duality she embodies, the combination of the light, youthful goddess of spring and the dark, powerful queen of the dead. This duality isn't just a narrative twist, it is the very essence of her identity, and it reflects the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth that defines not only the myth but also the natural world. After Persephone's abduction, she learned to embrace her new role as the queen of the underworld. As she adapted to her position alongside Hades, she began to wield her own power. No longer the carefree goddess of flowers, she became a ruler in a realm where death was the ultimate authority. And yet, despite the dark nature of her realm, Persephone still retained her connection to life. Her return to the earth each year symbolizes the renewal of spring and the return of growth. She is both the bringer of life and the queen of death, a figure who navigates between these realms with grace and strength. The image of Persephone as both queen and maiden is symbolic of the natural world cycles, life and death, growth and decay. Just as the seasons shift between winter and spring, Persephone moves between the underworld and the earth. Her story reflects the balance that exists in the world around us, where endings are always followed by new beginnings. The earth cannot be reborn without first experiencing a period of dormancy. And just as Persephone returns to the earth to bring life back to the land, her descent into the underworld marks the necessary stillness before rebirth. Historians still debate the deeper meaning behind Persephone's dual role. Is she a symbol of the balance between life and death, or is her story more about the journey from innocence to maturity? Some scholars argue that her experience in the underworld is a coming-of-age story, a transformation from a naive young goddess to a wise, powerful queen. Others suggest that Persephone's duality reflects the Greek understanding of the interconnectedness of all things, how life and death are not opposites but two sides of the same coin. Whether she is seen as a symbol of duality or transformation, Persephone's story offers a powerful reflection on the cycles of existence. As you rest tonight, think of Persephone's journey, her transition between worlds, and how she embodies the balance between the forces of life and death. Like the changing seasons, we too experience cycles of growth and stillness, of change and renewal. In the quiet of the night, we too move between the light and the dark, the awake and the asleep. Persephone's story reminds us that even in times of quiet or rest, there is always the promise of renewal and growth just around the corner. As we draw to the end of Persephone's journey, we're left to reflect on the enduring legacy of her myth. Persephone's story, full of contrasts, light and dark, life and death, innocence and power, has been passed down through generations, and her role as both goddess of spring and queen of the underworld remains one of the most powerful and relatable tales in Greek mythology. But more than just an ancient story, Persephone's tale continues to resonate with us today, serving as a reminder of the duality we all experience in life, and the transformative power of embracing both light and dark. In the ancient world, Persephone was seen as the symbol of nature's cycles. Her time in the underworld corresponded with winter, when the earth sleeps and the world lies dormant. Her return to the surface in spring symbolized the earth's rebirth, as plants and flowers blossomed again, and life returned in full force. This cycle of death and rebirth, which played out every year, was a core principle of the myth. But what makes Persephone's story so timeless is the deeper meaning it holds for us today. Persephone's story is more than just about the changing seasons. It speaks to the human experience of transformation, how we all must face loss, hardship, and change, only to emerge from it stronger and more whole. The very act of Persephone being taken from the light of the world and brought into the darkness of the underworld represents the inevitable moments of struggle and challenge that we all face in our lives. But just as Persephone rises each year to bring new life, we too can emerge from our own hardships and challenges, finding renewal and growth in the process. Historians still debate the symbolism of Persephone's dual existence. Some suggest that her myth is a representation of the transition from childhood to adulthood, where the innocence of youth gives way to the complexity of experience and wisdom. Others see her as embodying the necessary balance between opposing forces, life and death, creation and destruction, joy and sorrow. Persephone, in this sense, becomes a symbol of resilience, the ability to find strength in the face of adversity, and the ultimate hope that life continues, no matter how dark the moments may seem. In modern times, we can see echoes of Persephone's story in our own experiences. We all go through periods of growth and quiet, times when we feel like we are in the underworld, isolated, uncertain, or even lost. But like Persephone, we can find our way back to the light, to a place of renewal and strength. Her myth teaches us that both the light and the dark are necessary parts of life, and it's in navigating between the two that we find our true selves. As you drift into sleep tonight, remember Persephone's journey. She embraced both her roles as queen of the underworld and goddess of spring, finding peace in the balance of opposites. Just as Persephone's return marks the arrival of spring's beauty, may you find peace and renewal in the quiet of your own rest, ready for whatever the next day brings. Like Persephone, we are all connected to cycles of change, and in embracing them, we too can find our way through the darkness to the light.